education, the entire sector of education. This is also important from mains point of view also, and some of the schemes and some of the initiatives are important from pre point of view, right? अभी तक तो आपके ओरिएंटेशन आ गया होगा कि एक टॉपिक में कौन सी चीज़ें प्री के लिए इम्पोर्टेंट है और किस तरह का फोकस हमें मेंस के लिए करना है उन सब्जेक्ट में, राइट? तो एजुकेशन इज अगेन एज इम्पोर्टेंट एज हेल्थ. दोनों पर क्वेश्चंस आ रहे हैं, पिछले कुछ सालों में पूछ रहे हैं मेंस में. Pre may definitely you have a larger scope to ask questions from, so we may expect question there also. तो एजुकेशन जनरली जब हम गवर्नमेंट की बात करते हैं तो वेलफेयर स्टेट लाइक इंडिया, whenever we talk of what role the government should play in the lives of people, तो एक क्वेश्चन आता है what should government do and what should not. And that question generally, whenever there is an attempt to answer that question, you get a very similar answer from the people who understand things. And what is that answer? जब ये डिबेट होता है कि सरकार को कंपनियां नहीं चलाना चाहिए, बिजनेस नहीं करना चाहिए, इट्स नॉट द जॉब ऑफ द गवर्नमेंट टू डू बिजनेस, राइट? गवर्नमेंट को प्रोडक्ट्स और सर्विसेज जो मार्केट प्रोवाइड कर सकता है ऐसे चीज़ों में नहीं जाना चाहिए. And then what is left with the government are generally about four important things, जो बहुत बड़े ब्रैकेट में डाला जा सकता है. तो वो क्या कहते हैं कि कुछ चीज़ें ऐसी है जो हमेशा सरकार को उसमें एक इम्पॉर्टेंट रोल प्ले करते रहना होगा, इनफैक्ट एक लीडिंग रोल प्ले करना होगा, और कुछ मामलों में तो एक्सक्लूसिव भी. वो कौन सी फील्ड्स हैं? मॉरल पुलिसिंग, गवर्नमेंट मॉरल पुलिसिंग नहीं करती. गवर्नमेंट तो कानून बनाती है, मॉरल पुलिसिंग लोग करते हैं. गवर्नमेंट को कुछ करना होगा तो मॉरल पुलिसिंग का मतलब होता है कि लीगल नहीं है पुलिस. बट एनीवे दैट्स अ डिफरेंट टॉपिक, बट वेरी राइटली आइडेंटिफाइड. तो कुछ एरियाज जो हमेशा रहेंगे, जो सरकार को करते रहने पड़ेंगे, डिफेंस हो गया, दूसरा फॉरेन रिलेशंस हो गया, ये सरकार ही करेगा, राइट? बहुत एक्सक्लूसिव रोल जिनमें होंगे. बहुत बेसिक इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर वो भी सरकार को बनाना पड़ेगा, देन लॉ एंड ऑर्डर, वो एक ऐसा चीज है सरकार को करते रहना होगा. एंड ऑफ कोर्स देन हेल्थ, एंड देन एजुकेशन. ये बट नॉट इन दैट ऑर्डर, नॉट इन द ऑर्डर ऑफ, दिस इज नॉट इन द ऑर्डर ऑफ importance. It's just a listing, right? If you ask me which of these is the most important, then I would say this and this, and then I would add maybe somewhere this, and then maybe the others will come. But then there is a general agreement that these are the areas which should be taken care of by the government. Okay, so, and that is the position of education that we're going to talk about, because education is a very fundamental aspect of growth, overall progress of a country, of its people. Without education, you cannot think of progress of any kind, for that matter, of the people and the country. So ये चीजें इस context में अपने को देखनी. Now, what is education? Well, that can be defined in different ways. But what is, even before education comes something called literacy. And what is literacy needs also to be understood. So literacy का जो general sense में हम meaning लेते हैं वो क्या है?
To read and write.
Yeah, so being able to read and write, right? That's the simplest definition of literacy. and that's perhaps the first step towards education. Literacy and education are two different things. Do we differentiate them? Like literacy and education. Some people confuse these two things. Some people may think that it's one and the same thing, but it is not. Literacy is a small initial part of what is education, right? And just first initial step towards obtaining education. Now, there is another view which says that, well, literacy and education are so different that you may not be even literate to be educated, which is true from certain point of view, right? जरूरी नहीं है कि आपको पढ़ना लिखना आता ही हो तभी आप एजुकेट हो सकते हैं. Education, some people believe, and that's another way of looking at it, is independent of literacy. So that's another philosophical thought which has validity of its own. But what are we discussing now is in that sense, education in that sense, which has literacy as a part of it. Right? Particularly country like India, जिसमें हमारा हम कहते भी पहले भी हमने डिस्कस किया है, what is our biggest resource which we can utilize to develop? If you have to develop as a country, if you have to progress and make that overall progress, then it is human power. Manpower is a gender biased term, right? Human power. So that human power or human resource is the most important resource for India. Right? Of course, there is land, there are minerals, there are forests, but they're secondary. The primary and the most important resource we have is a human resource. Now we've already surpassed China, in terms of not just this human resource, but within this human resource, when you talk about is human resource is not a sheer number. It's not a sheer number of people that you look at. तो हम जनरली हम ऐसा नहीं देखते हैं जैसे 1.41 CR or rather just simply say 141 CR is a population of China, and say 143 CR is a population of, say, India. But it is not only in this term. What we generally see is the working or productive, there can be different working population, right? Or productive population of that society. And this largely comprises of the youth. Or a working population, by all estimates, by 2030, India would have the largest working population. Working population is generally considered to be 15 to 65 years of age. Generally. But even if we leave that out and focus on the youth of the country, which is generally, say, between 15 to 35 years of age, this bracket, India is going to be the largest country in terms of this bracket. ये जो bracket, this bracket compared to this bracket, उसको समझिए, has more significance. Which bracket has more significance? This bracket has more significance because this is very active and it has another 30 years of productive life, which means this is the area to focus on, right? To narrow down on. And if it is about human resources, if it is about people, then what we perhaps need to do is to make most of it. Making most of it means what? Making best use of the resource that you have, the most critical resources. The other countries do not have that resource. तो इस रिसोर्स का बेस्ट यूटिलाइजेशन आप कब कर पाएंगे? उसके लिए सबसे जरूरी चीजें क्या है? उसके लिए सबसे एसेंशियल चीजें जरूरी है कि वो स्वस्थ हो, आपके जो लोग हैं वो हेल्दी हो, और साथ में वो health is essential, and then the other is education. So if any country, education is in a broader sense, if any country wants to make sustainable, a progress that can be sustained, not a very high speed unsustainable progress. A sustainable progress and overall development must focus on these two areas. तो जो हमारा इन्वेस्टमेंट जो है वो ज़्यादा से ज़्यादा हर तरह का इन्वेस्टमेंट हमारा इन दो चीज़ों में जाना चाहिए. And particularly on education, given the fact that people would generally be healthy as we have more technological advances in the field of medicine, but education will not be taken care of automatically, right? Seeking health and seeking education are two different things, and they're approached differently by people. The people, the way they seek health, they do not seek education in a similar way. मतलब सीकिंग का मतलब है कि आप बीमार पड़ते तो आप रुकते नहीं, आप जाते हो डॉक्टर के पास जाते हो, यू सीक हेल्थ केयर. बट दैट डजंट हैपन विथ एजुकेशन. There's no immediacy there, there's no urgency there. So there is important factor in health and education. Health, seeking is available, so there is a demand for it all the time. There is a demand for it, but there may not be similar demand here. Seeking is weaker. और ये केवल इंडिया का नहीं है, जितने भी अंडर डेवलप्ड या डेवलपिंग कंट्रीज हैं उनमें ये प्रॉब्लम्स है. Now of course we are progressing on that. So we have to see education in this context, right? So just a few things, what we can say is, हमने इतना तो मान लिया है कि इंडिया को यदि आगे बढ़ना है, ओवरऑल प्रोग्रेस करनी है, तो एजुकेशन और हेल्थ पे फोकस करना पड़ेगा. What is the current situation in India? Let us look at the current situation. What is that? ये कॉन्टेक्स्ट समझ में आ गया एजुकेशन को किस तरह से देखना है, right? What is the current situation now? So if you see the current situation, there are various areas where you feel that you need to do more, right? And we of course come to all those specific areas. But what is in that current situation? What is the framework, the legal framework or the constitutional framework? वो क्या है? हमारे पास कॉन्स्टिट्यूशनल और लीगल फ्रेमवर्क क्या है? एजुकेशन का anybody can tell me a few points?
Article 21A.
So you have Article 21A. So this Article 21A is there, of course, that's a legal framework, constitutional framework. Then
I guess Article 45.
Article 45. What does it? This makes. Just remember this thing. Yeah, this makes right to education a fundamental right. 45, of course, has been there. It was because it's a DPSP, so it was an aspirational thing. It said the state will strive to provide free and compulsory education, elementary education, right, to children in the age of 16 to 14. That was earlier Article 45. Now, when this was made into a fundamental right, this article has now no relevance, Article 45, because वो तो fundamental right ही बना दिया, तो वहाँ will strive, shall strive वाला कुछ नहीं होता. So now this Article 45 actually has been now changed to 0 to 6 age group. Similar wording, but ensure 0 to 6 का ही हो. So there is Article 45 still, but that doesn't cater to the age group of 6 to 14, but it caters to what? 0 to 6. What else is there?
Is Article 51K.
Article 51A.
No, 51(1)K. I think.
Article 51AK, right? Okay, so we can go here and there. What is Article 51AK? 51A is a fundamental duty, right? K is, of course, we had fundamental duties till J, and now we have K, which is basically, it puts a responsibility on the parents to ensure that the children get education, in particularly in this age group, right? So that's there. Then you said Article 46 is also there, which is about it. It places special responsibility on the state for providing special provision for the education and economic progress of the weaker sections, say, scheduled caste, scheduled tribe, and other backward classes, and other weaker sections. So these are some of the, what else?
I
No,
think
we're talking about
Article 15(4).
we are talking about basically constitutional provision. So yes, Article 15 also has that provision, right? Because it does talk about special, provisions for educational, um, development of certain communities. What else is there? No, the 16 relates to employment, but education is basically that, you know. Article 29, what does it talk about?
I think distinct culture,
Huh?
language, literature, protecting the minorities, literature,
Yes.
language.
So basically, educational institutions by minorities, right? Minority education institutions का एक है. So that is also related to education. Very important clause when it's. So what is there? What are the articles which talk about education? We're just trying to list that. What about Article 30? Right?
So
What does it talk
administration
about?
of educational institution.
Yeah, the their that they have right to establish their association. In fact, to that extent, you may also put Article 28 here, sort of. You know why? It also talks about education, but in a different way. What does it say? Article 28. Article 20
Yeah,
has
it
eight
related
other.
to religious freedom, establishment of.
So it talks about the fact that religious instructions cannot be imparted in educational institutions, that nobody can be forced to undergo religious instructions or worship in any educational institution. So that also relates that to that extent. So there are large number of provisions which relate to some of the other aspect of education. So you have a broad, so constitution does put lot of emphasis on education now, because no other article has so many, no other aspect has so many articles devoted to it, including the fundamental right. Then of course, you can also think of Article 41, which is right to, it talks about some point in time the state should try to provide right to work and education, right? So even that can be included to some extent. So now this can go on. Which is very important to remember is that these all features cover some of the other aspect of education. So just have a broad view in mind, prepare it properly. There can be a question on this. Prepare yourself on that. Then, of course, these have been the provisions, but let us also look at some of the amendments that have happened during this course in the Constitution. So there are some amendments, very important amendments, which have happened to the Constitution. We are still talking about the constitutional framework. What are those amendments? Can you think of them? Amendments?
86th.
86. But before that, there have been certain amendments, important amendments to the Constitution. There can be a question from any angle, which of these is not related to education? Which of the following constitutional amendments are related to education? And you would, so 42nd constitutional amendment. When did that happen? Of course, 42nd constitutional amendment is a very, very big amendment. What did it do? It did many things, but in terms of education,
I think it made it concurrent.
that's very true. That's correct. So education was in a state list till then. In the 7th schedule, it was a subject uh, given to the state. In 1976, by 72nd amendment, this was shifted to concurrent list. We've seen that this hasn't happened with health yet, right? Though most of the big flagship programs in health are run by the central government, but health is purely a state subject. But they did that back, and there was a small history why they did it. We'll talk about that, but there was a sarkar, I don't know whether you've heard of that. There was that was a period. Of course, this was emergency, but most of the things, most of the amendments carried out during emergency were radical, and they were good amendments. They had to be, such as one of these is this, except the ones who were related to law and order or election or that period. The rest of them were good amendments. This is one of them. So गवर्नमेंट had appointed a कोठारी कमीशन. आपने सुना होगा, तो कोठारी कमीशन हुआ करती थी. So what happened? Kothari commission basically gave certain recommendations to improve education in India, and based on the recommendation of the Kothari commission, the government of India came up with, that was in 1968, it came up with first national policy on education. Okay, the first national policy on education was based on this commission's recommendations in 1968. But then what happened? This came and government did want to implement it, but the federal features were kind of a stumbling block then. If you remember, this is the period when some of the regional governments had started being formed by political parties other than Congress, right? And then here on, that had been the trend. So it was found difficult that time to convince some of the state governments to implement some of the provisions of these policies, right? And that was one of the reasons why, when these amendments were being made, they shifted this to the concurrent list. So that is one important amendment as far as education is concerned. Then, of course, after that, as you rightly mentioned, then in 2002, another important amendment was made. That was 86th constitutional amendment. You all know that, so we're just rushing through this part just to put it in context. What happened in this? So this was right to education as a fundamental right, and then this is the amendment that inserted article 21A जो आप बता रहे. So this is an important constitutional amendment. Then, of course, we have one more constitutional amendment related to the sector of education. That was in 2006, I believe, which was 93rd constitutional amendment. It provided, it amended Article 15 and said that till then, the provision of representation or special provision for SC, ST and OBCs was limited to the educational institutions run by the government. But then this extended it to private and aided and unaided all. So that's another important constitutional amendment
So
on this.
private universities provide reservation on the basis of categories.
They do, yeah.
Okay, I didn't know this.
Yeah, they have to, they do.
Okay.
All right, so any questions on this? So you know the constitutional framework. You should be able to handle any question on constitutional framework around education. Then other than that, there have been some legal provisions. But let us briefly see what are those, what has happened. Uh, you have this act coming in 2002. 2002 में 21A आया. This made education a fundamental right. But when did it get implemented?
2009.
So basically, जब इसको केवल आर्टिकल बना देने से तो नहीं होगा ना. So you will have to have some provision. So then they came up with an act, which is right to education. Simply speaking, right to education act. So generally RTE बोलते हैं इसको. This act came in 2009, but was implemented in 2010. So 2010. So it took almost 8 years for this article to take effect. And it was through this Right to Education Act that Article 21A was put into implementation. In 2010, 2010 में इस एक्ट के माध्यम से वो लागू हुआ, राइट. So let us see what is this article, this act. ये इसके बारे में ज़्यादातर लोगों को पता है ही. It's a very important act. Primary purpose of this act was to give effect to this article, right? So please let us see what are the some important or salient features of this act. So please write down them, right? So what are the salient features of this act? So basically, it provided free and compulsory education for